Welcome. I am Larry Hoy, biker writer legend. Welcome to First Chapter, a podcast where I take the time to introduce you to some wonderful books that you may not have heard before. So, before further ado, let's get on to it. First Chapter. Today I'm going to introduce you to a absolute personal favorite of mine, the Myth Adventures series. Another fine myth. It was re-released just yesterday, and I can't wait to. Well, I'm just absolutely tickled. My copy, I got into the Myth series about 35 years ago. It has just been a wonderful thing. I've gone through the series at least a dozen times. I hope you really enjoy it. It's like I said, it's a fantasy novel. There's a lot of comedy through the series. And we're going into the first chapter of Another Fine Myth right now. Chapter 1. There are things on heaven and earth, Horatio, man was not meant to know. Hamlet. One of the few redeeming facets of instructors, I thought, is the occasionally they can be fooled. It was true with my mother taught me to read. It was true when my father tried to teach me to be a farmer. And it's true now that I'm learning magic. You haven't been practicing. Garkin's harsh admonishment interrupted my musings. I have too, I protested. It's just a difficult exercise. As if in response, the feather I was levitating began to tremble and wobble in the air. You aren't concentrating, he accused. It's the wind, I argued. I wanted to add, from your loud mouth, but I didn't dare. Early in our lessons, Garkin demonstrated his lack of appreciation for cheeky apprentices. The wind? He sneered, mimicking my voice. Like this, dolt. My mental contact with the object of my concentration was interrupted as the feather darted suddenly towards the ceiling. It jarred to a halt as if it had become embedded in something, although it was still a foot from the wooden beams. Then it slowly rotated to a horizontal plane. Just as slowly it rotated on its axis, then it swapped ends and began to glide around an invisible circle, like a leaf caught in an eddy. I risked a glance at Gherkin. He was draped over his chair, feet dangling, his entire attention apparently devoted to devouring a leg of roast lizard bird. A bird I snared, I might add. Concentration, indeed. He looked up suddenly and our eyes met. It was too late to look away, so I simply looked back at him. Hungry? His grease-flecked salt and pepper beard was suddenly framed with a wolfish grin. Then show me how much you've been practicing. It took me a heartbeat to realize what he meant. Then I looked up desperately. The feather was trembling forward, a bare shoulder height from landing. Forcing the sudden tension from my body, I reached out with my mind. Gently, form a pillow. Don't knock it away. The feather halted a scant 2 handspans from the floor. I heard Garkin's low chuckle, but I didn't allow it to break my concentration. I hadn't let the feather touch the floor in 3 years, and it wasn't going to touch now. Slowly, I raised it until it floated at eye level. Wrapping my mind around it, I rotated it on its axis and then enticed it to swap ends. As I led it through the exercise, its movement was not as smooth or as sure when Gherkin set his mind to the task, but it did move unerringly on its assigned course. Although I had not been practicing with the feather, I had been practicing. When Garkin was not about or preoccupied with his own studies, I devoted most of my time to levitating pieces of metal, keys to be specific. Each type of levitation had its own inherent problems. Metal was hard to work with because it was an inert metal. The feather, having once been part of a living thing, was more responsive. Too responsive. To lift metal took effort. To maneuver a feather required subtlety. Of the two, I preferred to work with metal. I could see a more direct application of that skill in my chosen profession. Good enough, lad. Now put it back in the book. I smiled to myself. This part I had practiced, not because of its potential applications, but because it was fun. The book was lying open on the end of the workbench. I brought the feather down in a long, lazy spiral, allowing it to pass lightly across the pages of the book and end up in a swooping arc. I stopped it and brought it back. As it approached the book the second time, I disengaged part of my mind to dart ahead to the book. As the feather crossed the pages, the book snapped shut like the jaws of a hungry predator trapping the missile within its grasp. Intoned Gherkin. A trifle showy, but effective. Just a little something I worked up when I was practicing, I said casually, reaching out with my mind for the other lizard bird leg. Instead of floating gracefully to my waiting hand, however, it remained on the wooden platter as if it had taken root. Not so fast, my little sneak thief. So you've been practicing, eh? He stroked his beard thoughtfully as a half-gnarled bone in his hand. Certainly. Didn't it show? It occurred to me the Gherkin was not as easy to fool as it sometimes seemed. In that case, I'd like to see you light your candle. Should be easy if you've been practicing as much as you claim. I have no objections to trying, but as you said yourself, so many times some lessons come easier than others. Although I sounded confident, my spirits sank as the large candle came floating to the work table in response to Gherkin's summons. In 4 years of trying, I had yet to be successful in this particular exercise. If Gherkin was going to keep me from food until I was successful, I could go hungry for a long time. Gherkin, it occurs to me I could probably concentrate better on a full stomach. It occurs to me that you're stalling. Couldn't I? Now, Skeeve. There was no swaying him when he used my proper name. That much I'd learned long over the years. Lad, thief, idiot, turnip head, though derogatory, as long as he used one of these, his mind was still open. Once he reverted to my proper name, it was hopeless. It was indeed a sorry state when the sound of your own name becomes the knell of doom. Well, if there was no way around it, I'd just have to give it my best shot. For this, there could be no half effort or fainted concentration. I'd have to use every ounce of my strength and skill to summon the power. I studied the candle with a detached mind, momentarily blanking the effort ahead from my consciousness. The room, the cluttered workbench, Gherkin, even my own hunger faded from view as I focused on the candle, though I had long since memorized its every feature. It was stout, nearly 6 inches across to stabilize its 10-inch height. I had carved numerous mystic symbols into the surface, copied painstakingly from Gherkin's books at his direction, though many of them were partially obliterated by hardened rivulets of wax. The candle had burned many long hours to light my studies, but it had always been lit from a taper from the cooking fire and not from my efforts. Negative thought. Stop it. I will light the candle this time. I will light it because there's no reason I should not. Consciously deepening my breathing, I began to gather the power. My world narrowed further until all I was aware of was a curled blackened wick of the candle. I am Skeeve. My father has a farmer's bond with the earth. My mother was an educated woman. My teacher is a master magician. I am Skeeve. I will light this candle. I could feel myself beginning to grow warm as the energies began to build within me. I focused the heat on the wick. Like my father, I tapped the strength of the earth. The knowledge my mother gave me is like a lens, enabling me to focus what I have gained. The wisdom of my teacher directs my efforts to the points of the universe most likely to yield to my will. I am Skeeve. The candle remained unlit. There was sweat on my forehead now, and I was beginning to tremble with the effort. No, that was wrong. I should not tense. Relax. Don't try to force it. Tenseness hinders the flow. Let the energies pass freely. Serve as a passive conductor. I forced myself to relax, consciously letting the muscles in my face and shoulders go slack as I redoubled my efforts. The flow was noticeably more intense now. I could almost see the energy streaming from me to my target. I stretched out a finger, which focused my energies even more. The candle remained unlit. I couldn't do it. Negative thought. Stop it. I am Skeeve. I will light the candle. My father... No. Negative thought. Don't rely on others for your strength. I'll light the candle because I am Skeeve. I was rewarded by a sudden urge of energy at the thought. I pursued it, growing heady with power. I am Skeeve. I am stronger than any of them. I escaped my father's attempts to chain me to the plow as he had my brother. My mother died from her idealism, but I used her teaching to survive. My teacher is a gullible fool who took a thief for an apprentice. I've beaten them all. I am Skeeve. I will light the candle. I was floating now. I realized how my abilities dwarfed those around me. Whether the candle lit or was not was insequential. I am Skeeve. I am powerful. Almost contemptuously, I reached out with my mind and touched the wick. A small bright ember appeared as if in answer to my will. Startled, I sat up and blinked at the candle. As I did, the ember disappeared, leaving a small white plume of smoke to mark its departure. I realized too late I had broken concentration. Excellent, lad! Garkin was suddenly beside, pounding my shoulder enthusiastically. How long he'd been there, I neither knew nor cared. It went out, I said plaintively. Oh, never mind that. You lit it! You have the confidence now. Next time it'll be easy. By the stars, we'll make a magician of you yet. Here, you must be hungry. I barely got my hand up in time to intercept the remaining lizard bird leg before it smacked into my face. It was cold. I don't mind admitting I was beginning to despair, lad. What made that lesson so hard? Had it occurred to you you could use the spell to give you extra light when you're picking a lock, or even start a fire to serve as a diversion? I thought about it, but extra light could draw unwitted attention. As far as a diversion, I'd be afraid of hurting someone. I don't want to hurt anyone, just... I stopped, realizing what I was saying too late. A heavy cuff from Garkin sent me sprawling off my stool. I thought so. You're still planning to be a thief. You want to use my magic to steal. He was towering in his rage, but for once I stood my ground. What of it? I snarled. It beats starving. What's so good about being a magician anyway? I mean, your lifestyle here gives me so much to look forward to. I gestured at the cluttered room that was the entirety of the hut. Listen to the wolfling complain, Gherkin sneered. It's good enough for you when the winter drove you out of the woods to steal. It beats sleeping under a bush, you said. And it still does. That's why I'm still here. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life here. Hiding in a little hut in the woods is not my idea of a future to look forward to. You were living on roots and berries until I came along and started trapping meat for the fire. Maybe that's your idea of a wonderful life, Garkin, but it's not mine. We stared at each other for several long moments. Now that my anger was vented, I was a little more than a little afraid. While I had not had extensive experience in the field, I suspected that sneering at magicians was not the best way to ensure a long and healthy future. Surprisingly enough, it was Garkin who gave ground first. He suddenly dropped his gaze and bowed his head, giving me a rare view of the unkempt mass of hair atop his head. Perhaps you're right, Skeeve, his voice strangely soft. Perhaps I've been showing you all the work of magic, but not the rewards. I constantly forget how suppressed magic is in these lands. He raised his eyes to meet mine again, and I shivered at the impact. They weren't angry, but deep within them burned a glow I had never seen before. Know you now, Skeeve, that all the lands are not like this one. Nor was I always as you see me now. In lands where magic is recognized instead of feared as it is here, it is respected and commissioned by those in power. There's a skillful magician who keeps his wits about him, can recoup 100 times the wealth you aspire to as a thief, and such power that... He broke off suddenly and shook his head as if to clear it. When he opened his eyes again, the glow I'd seen burning earlier had died to an ember. But you aren't to be impressed by words, are you, lad? Come, I'll show you a little demonstration of some of the power you may one day wield, if you practice your lessons, that is. The joviality in his voice was forced. I nodded my agreement in answer to that burning gaze. Truth to tell, I needed no demonstration. His soft, brief oration had awed me far more than any angry tirade or demonstration, but I didn't wish to contradict him at this time. I didn't believe he actually noticed my response. He was already striding into the large pentagram permanently inscribed in the floor of the hut. As he walked, he gestured absent-mindedly, and the charred copper brazier scuttled forward from its place in the corner to meet him at the center of the pentagram. I had time to reflect that perhaps it was the brazier that first drew me to Garkin. I remembered the first time I peered through the window of his hut, seeking to identify the place and objects of value for a later theft. I'd seen Garkin as I'd seen him so often since, pacing restlessly up and down the room, his nose buried in a book. It was surprisingly enough sight as it was, for reading was not a common pastime in this area. But what captured my attention was the brazier. It hobbled about the room, following Garkin around like an impatient puppy, just a little too polite to jump up on its master to get attention. Then Garkin looked up from his book, stared thoughtfully at his workbench, when a sudden nod of dissension gestured. A small pot of unidentified content rose from the clutter and floated to his waiting hand. He caught it, referred to his book again, and poured out a dollop without looking up. Quick as a cat, the brazier scrambled under his hand and caught the dollop before it reached the floor. That had been my introduction to magic. Something wrenched my attention back to the present. What was it? I checked Garkin's progress. No, he was still at work, half hidden by a floating cloud of vials and jars, mumbling as he occasionally plucked one from the air and added a bit of its content to the brazier. Whatever he was working on, it promised to be spectacular. Oh, then I heard it again. A muffled step outside the hut. But that was impossible. Garkin always set the... I began to search my memory. I couldn't recall Garkin setting the protective wards before he started to work. Ridiculous. Caution was the first and foremost important thing Garkin hammered into me, and part of the caution was always setting wards before you started working. He couldn't have forgotten. But he had been rather intense and distracted. I was still trying to decide if I should attempt to interrupt Garkin's work as he suddenly stepped back from the brazier. He fixed me with a gaze, and my warning died in my throat. This was not the time to impose reality on the situation. The glow was back in his eyes, stronger than ever before. Even demonstrations should give a lesson, he intoned. Control, Skeeve. Control is the mainstay of magic. Power without control is a disaster, and that's why you practice with a feather, though you're able to move much larger and heavier objects. Control. Even your meager powers would be dangerous unless controlled, and I'll not teach you more until you've learned that control. He carefully stepped out of the pentagram. To demonstrate the value of control, I will now summon forth a demon, a being from another world. He's powerful, cruel, and vicious. He would kill us both if given the chance. Yet, despite this, we need not fear him, because he will be controlled. He'll be unable to harm us or anything else in this world as long as he's contained within that pentagram. Now, watch, Skeeve. Watch and learn. So saying, he turned once more to the brazier, spread his hands as he did. The 5 candles at the points of the pentagram sprang to life, and the lines of the pentagram began to glow with an eerie blue light. Silence reigned for several minutes, and then he began to chant in a low mumble. A thread of smoke appeared from the brazier, but instead of rising to the ceiling, it poured onto the floor and began to form a small cloud that seethed and pulsed. Garkin's chanting was even louder now, and the cloud darkened. The brazier was almost obscured from view, but there, in the depths of the cloud, something was taking shape. "Istvan sends his regards, Garkin!" I nearly jumped out of my skin at the words. They came from inside the hut. Well, not inside the pentagram. I whirled to their source. A figure was standing just inside the door, blinding in a glowing gold cloak. For a mad moment, I thought it was the demon answering Garkin's summons. Then I saw the crossbow. It was a man, all right, but the crossbow, cocked and loaded in his hand, did little for my peace of mind. Garkin didn't even turn to look. "Not now, you fool!" he snarled. "It's been a long hunt, Garkin," the man continued, as if he hadn't heard. "You've hidden yourself well, but you didn't really hope to escape." "You dare!" Garkin spun from his work, towering with rage. The man saw Garkin's face now, saw the eyes, his face contorted into a grotesque mask of fear. Reflexively, he loosed the bolt from the crossbow, but too late. I didn't see what Garkin did. Things were happening so fast, but the man suddenly disappeared in a sheet of flame. He shrieked in agony and fell to the floor. The flame disappeared as suddenly as it had come, leaving only the smoldering corpse as evidence it had existed at all. I remained rooted to the spot for several moments before I could move or even speak. "Garkin?" I said at last. Garkin!" Garkin's form was a crumpled lump on the floor. I was at his side in one bound, but it was far too late. The crossbow bolt protruded with silent finality from his chest. Garkin had given me my last lesson. As I stooped to touch his body, I noticed something that froze my blood in my veins. Half hidden by his form was the extinguished candle from the north point of the pentagram. The lines were no longer glowing blue. The protective spell was gone. With agonizing effort, I raised my head and found myself gazing into a pair of yellow eyes, flecked with gold, that were not of this world. All right, so that is the first chapter of Another Fine Myth. I'm so excited it has been re-released. It breaks my heart. I never got to meet Robert Asprin and tell him what an impact this series made on me. I encourage you, get out there on Amazon, get Another Fine Myth, get hooked in the series like I did. Like I said, this is my copy that I got, 30, 35 years ago. So it's got some wear and tear. But thank you very much. Can't wait to see what we pull out next week. I am Larry Hoy, biker rider legend, and thank you for stopping by First Chapter. Hope you had a great time. If you too can be a First Chapter book of the week, drop me a message. If you're an author and you've got a book ready to share, drop me a message. I'd love to read it. And if I haven't met your favorite author yet, introduce me. My goodness. I could also use your support. Go to Amazon and pick up the Hit World book series, especially the Sweetwater Chronicles. The newest book, Boom Boom, Demon's Kiss, is out now. Try it out there. I would love to see it. Drop your review on Amazon. Appreciate it. And I will see you all next week.